Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our education book discussion today with Kathleen DeLaski. I'm Jenna Robinson, president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. The Martin Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to excellence and accountability in higher education. Our work shines sunlight on and provides solutions for the most critical issues in higher education. You can find out more at jamesgmartin.center. Thank you to all of our viewers and donors for making events like this possible. Although this event is free, we appreciate those of you who made voluntary contributions. Your support makes our work possible. The Martin Center's education book discussions are quarterly online events with authors of recent books about higher education or related topics. Today, we're going to talk about innovation, one of the Martin Center's ongoing interests. Specifically, we'll be hearing about Kathleen DeLaski's reimagined educational landscape. I'll hand the floor over to Kathleen shortly, but I want to take 1 minute to tell you how this event will run. First, Kathleen will talk for about 20 minutes about her book. Then she will take questions from the audience and my colleague, George Leaf, who will moderate all those questions. Viewers on Zoom, you can post your questions by using the Q&A icon at any time. And viewers on Facebook, simply post your questions in the comments section, and we'll be sure to monitor those as well. Also, we are recording this event so you can watch it later or share it online. We'll be sure to send you the link as soon as the video is posted. Again, thank you for being here and supporting our work. We hope to see some of you in person at some of our events this fall. So the book we're talking about today is Who Needs College Anymore? Imagining a Future Where Degrees Won't Matter, which was published in February of this year. The book offers an innovative look at how education and career preparation might look in the future. The author is Kathleen DeLaski, an education innovator and author who founded the Education Design Lab in 2013 to help reimagine higher education for the future of work. Under her leadership, the lab has helped over 1,200 institutions and regions create shorter, more affordable pathways to economic opportunity. Now board chair, she also serves on the board of Credential Engine and advises Harvard's project on workforce. Kathleen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I was telling the backstage group that I'm very excited to be doing this chat with you all, particularly with the North Carolina roots, because my first journalism job was in Raleigh-Durham. I worked for Channel 11 as a cub reporter, and I also was an apprentice or intern there when I was in college. I went to Duke University there, and I won't say when, but it was a long time ago. Let's say the airport was very small. So it's nice to be here with you today. So I really wrote this book because I had spent about 20 years at that point in various forms of education reform, starting with a fairly long stint as an executive at Sallie Mae, which many of you remember as the student lending giant at the time. It was a Fortune 500 company, and we did all kinds of loans. I was brought in as the chief communications and policy officer, but also the reason I took the job was to start their foundation because I was excited they had a bunch of money that had come to them in an acquisition that was earmarked to support, people who couldn't afford to do uh, to afford college on their own and didn't qualify for lending. So we really that really sort of I whet my appetite and learned a lot about the people for whom college was not designed and for whom the journey was an aspiration, but like how was it going to be possible? So that really got me started in thinking about this. I was there for about 8 years. But then I also, from there, I went into K-12 education reform, ended up working for the Walton Family Foundation, and I we went around the country and we're doing a lot of efforts and advocacy efforts and policy efforts to creating more high quality seats. That was the term then, high quality seats was the early 2000s, for particularly urban students, but also rural students, who were victims of zip code destiny was the term that was popular then, that, would basically say where you go to school in K-12 and whether you get into, whether you're born into a good school district, your family can afford a house or home in a good school district, determines the trajectory of your life. And so a lot of us, that were kind of interested in college access back then, kind of flocked into the charter school movement and the voucher movement. And, I was all in on that movement and spent, another 5 or 6 years working on that area. But a lot of us began to see in the kind of, 2000 aughts that we were making gains in getting students into college and more in a broader swath or broader, more types of students into college. But the success rates once they got there were really, as we began to see the results, were really pretty devastating. And by that I mean that something like 50% of students of color and students from low income backgrounds were stepping into the college gauntlet and being spit back out in some way. 50%. I mean that, for those of us that were, thinking we were doing, the good work and helping make this possible, began to really rethink the strategy, right? Because a lot of them came out with debt, even though they didn't have a degree. And so the idea that you have to get all the way to the end of a 4-year degree became a kind of binary, journey or goal that so many people were not meeting. And when I went out to research the book, I just met more and more of these people, particularly people in their 20s for whom, they tried to go through the maze and then they couldn't, it was like an Odyssean quest that they couldn't get to the end of. And so when I started, so then I started the Education Design Lab, which is now a national nonprofit, which Jenna referenced. I started that in 2013. And this was really a period when a lot of money was coming into higher education. It was like people were, that was the age when MOOCs first came out, right? When this idea that we could have a democratization movement where you didn't have to go to Harvard or Stanford to get a degree. You could just take a course, a massive online open course, and get a little certificate at the end of it, and you would be able to get hired by Google. And once that happened for a few people, we all, the light bulbs started to go off, right? We were all like, yes, this is the answer. Let's unbundle the college degree and make it accessible to people, give them credentials of meaning along the way if they do want to go all the way on the journey. And so the micro credentialing movement began. And that's where the lab, the organization that I ran for 10 years and, in the last couple of years have stepped back and let others take ownership. They've really pioneered the idea of what we call micro pathways, particularly with community colleges, where, this idea that you don't have that the degree doesn't have to be the goal. You can design a shorter pathway with your regional employers that ends in a credential of meaning and that has skills that have been designed or organized with the employers, and that can become a stepladder approach to your education journey. And the degree becomes a nice to have but not essential. And we can come back to talk about the people who do still really care about degrees and why that's important. But for the person who wants to be on a faster journey to get there, to become job ready and have validated skills that create signals for employers that there are cheaper, faster, better ways to do that. So that's what led us to start the lab and led me on this journey that now I'm going back to my roots. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I was a journalist in my early career. I was actually a journalist for 20 years. I mean, that's what I did up until, almost until I started into education. And so it sort of now that I'm kind of in the twilight of my career, right? I feel like it's appropriate to kind of come back and try to write, a piece of journalism, which is how I approach the book, more journalistically than academically, to, sort of tell the story of we need a wake-up call. Higher education needs a wake-up call. We are not serving the needs of the new majority of learners. 63% of American adults do not have a four-year degree, and we are not servicing them. And I actually posit that this is one of the reasons for the resentment, the political resentment that we see, um, that has bubbled up over the past decade, is the education haves and have-nots. You definitely see a political divide for them. And so many people feel left behind because we tell them the narrative is you have to have a degree to get a good job. And yet we also now have a growing narrative that says, the college degree isn't really worth it. It's not the ROI, the return on investment is not enough as the price tag keeps going up. So when you go to kitchen tables and sit with families, particularly those who are not financially well off, they're faced with this, okay, it's not worth it, you're telling me, but I have to have it. And they're kind of they're feeling a bit constrained and stressed, by decision points that don't make sense to them. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I actually, through my work at the lab and other work other folks are doing, I see a lot of um, opportunity and innovation and positive ways to work through this, but they often get pushed aside by the kind of the general narrative, that higher ed, that, oh, we all, those of us who got to go to college at a different time, the nostalgia is holding in place our view about what the future should look like. So, George, why don't I stop there? I mean, that's sort of, I just sort of started with why I wrote the book and a bit about my background. And you can take it wherever we need to go.
I've got to say that you obviously understood something important. A book needs a good title to sell, to grab the reader. And by the way, here it is. And as soon as I saw that title, I instantly ordered up a review copy. And as soon as that arrived, I started reading it. And it was a spectacular piece of work. As you say, it's a journalistic piece of work, easy to read, easy to remember. And I have recommended it to quite a few other people I know. In fact, a few people who saw me with the book, and they said, "Well, what's that all about?" And I said, "Oh, let me tell you." So, oh, and then I also did a podcast about your book with Arnold Kling several weeks ago. Anyway, let me start off with this question. An interesting phenomenon you described is that employers are starting to fish upstream for
Mhm.
workers that they need. Now, could you explain what you mean by that and maybe give us some examples?
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the questions I raise in the book related to employers is, do they need colleges anymore? Um, and the answer, because a lot of, if we can certify people for jobs and everything's a lot more fluid, and there's a wide understanding that skills are becoming obsolete quickly, and so by the time you finish college, and let's say you have a cybersecurity degree or an engineering degree, or have the skills changed enough that you actually need a refresher course pretty much as soon as you finish. So one thing that has raised is, well, maybe employers could just be hiring people earlier and training them, and sending them out for the kinds of training they need, whether it's to colleges or other kinds of corporate training efforts. And I think, so an example would be, um, I interview a young man in the book named Patrick, who is getting industry certifications in high school, as many people are now. And there's a big push now around, career technical education in high school to be more available to all students, even if you're college track. And so Patrick was college track. I mean, he thought hoped to go to college. But he said, I didn't have good grades. I wasn't very motivated. And he was taking these elective classes in CTE, career and technical education through his high school. And he ended up getting three certifications from CompTIA, which is an intermediary that basically, provides certifications and tests, for certain network security and other kinds of tech and cyber skills. So, you actually have to sit for a proctored test at the end of it to demonstrate your skill level, right? So he had a couple of these skill sets, and he, had the micro credentials to prove it, right? And he didn't get in. He only applied to one college. He wanted to go to Virginia Tech here with his friends, and he didn't get in. So he thought, well, maybe I'll just go to community college. And so he said, I'll get a job for the summer. So he put his resume up on Indeed, one of the job boards, and he started getting calls from recruiters from the data centers, in Northern Virginia where he lived. And AWS hired him $70,000 um, you know, uh, on a contract, right? And after, he seemed to be doing pretty well, the contract turned into a full-time job. He got raises. He started taking the classes at Northern Virginia Community College, but he's like, well, I kept getting promotions at work, and then eventually he left because he got a software engineering job, which he kind of hacked his way into by teaching himself some of the software, tools that he saw were, that were, required for the job. And he got hired. And today he's 23 years old and he's making um, like 120,000, he told me. And he said, he dropped out of community college because he, was working full time. And he said, I don't even think if I finished that degree that I would even put it on my resume, because I've just got so many other things that would fill up the page and get me hired, more than that, associate's degree, or even if you went on to get a bachelor's. That's his view. So, that strategy doesn't work in every field. But, when I say fishing upstream, employers where there are appropriate signal, where there's signaling power with a credential, a micro credential, employers are going upstream to look for those skill sets when they have shortages. If they don't have shortages, then I mean that the data centers are still, it's still hard to hire the right people for those. I mean, that's one of the areas that's still hot. In areas that are not hot, you might not see that. I will say one other quick anecdote is another reason that employers are fishing upstream whenever the jobs require a security clearance is because they're trying to catch students before they go to college, before they get into trouble with, drugs, or even marijuana, because it's a federal, there's a federal issue with marijuana. They can't, you can't get a security clearance. And like I have friends and family where the young students have had to wait. You have to wait like, 3 or 5 or 7 years after smoked marijuana to before you can get a security clearance. So, that's another, I mean, that's just kind of a fun anecdote. A reason why they're fishing upstream is to get, pure, pure innocent kids who haven't, gone down the wrong path in college.
A good answer. I remember that anecdote, and that's I think what makes the book work so well is it's loaded with stories like that people will remember. Well, let's turn to a question here from Fergus Hodgson. He asks, "Are you concerned that education has been diminished to mere job training? What about the merits of educational enrichment? Isn't the problem that too few students care about that these days?"
Yeah, no, that's the question that always comes up in these conversations. And I, myself as a liberal arts English poli sci major, right? I hold dearly to, those courses, those wonderful courses I got to take that enriched my mind and, maybe have nothing to do with what I, ended up doing for a living. So yes, those of us lobbying for more choices, are still, and I'm definitely in this camp, I am very pro liberal arts degrees, pro college. I would even, supported my daughter to major in neuroscience, even though she, there was no way she was going, didn't want to go on to get a PhD, was never able to work in the field. There are two things that you get, I think, two key things that the shorter, faster micro-credentialing movement doesn't solve for. And those two things are your what they call, durable skills training, like critical thinking, collaboration, empathy, initiative, the kinds of things that you might not that clearly be learning in the classroom in a way that students would be able to talk about them in a job interview, but they are getting them, they're in there. But those are important. And so one of the things I've talked about and that we've done a lot of lab work with is how do you certify those skills? Like colleges should be offering, liberal arts colleges should be offering those kinds of classes in ways that result in the same kind of credentials that Patrick got to show that he was good at network security, right? So that's one road we could go down. The second piece is, I think the kind of it's a little bit different from the durable skills piece, but it's the idea that you could explore. Like, what if you show up at college and you don't know what you want to do yet? And this idea that, like I took a philosophy class my first year. I mean, I never became a philosopher, but the idea that I, could explore both my identity, my career options, and take some time to kind of bake as an adult, right? Those are the things that we don't want to give up, right? But at some point, the price tag becomes so high, then so many people are priced out of that market to have that, wonderful adultification experience, that you have to create multiple pathways. Which then leads to a situation where the rich get one set of options and people who aren't wealthy have, feel that they have to take the fast path. That is a byproduct of what I'm describing. Absolutely. But not offering multiple pathways is just creating a serious haves and have-nots on the education and sort of future job prospects front.
Let's turn to another question here. James Andrews asks, as AI reshapes how we define and verify competence and skills-based credentials keep expanding, what do you see as higher ed's role in that world? Should we be trying to lead that ecosystem or focus on what we're still uniquely good at?
I'm sorry. I kind of missed the first part. So which was the thing that where we should try to lead? Was that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll read it again. As AI reshapes how we define and verify competence and skills-based credentials keep expanding, what do you see as higher ed's core role in that world?
Mm-hmm.
Should we be trying to lead that ecosystem or focus on what we're still uniquely good at?
Yes. This is probably the question that is, animating a lot of the conversations and a lot of these, book talks that I'm doing right now. And I feel like it's come into focus even more since I put the pencil down and writing the book, right? So that would have been like last summer. I finished writing. I mean, all the themes are still all, I think, very much ahead of us, and still feel prescient. But the AI piece is seeping down into the public, instead of public understanding about how cataclysmic or how, whatever you want to call it, apocalyptic or groundbreaking it's going to be. and not just for the people that want to become, large language model architects, right? But for all of us. And what does that mean? What even is the role of teaching and learning if you can, bring your phone to class or your laptop to class, which, because I'm teaching at George Mason right now in university, and this is I see it happening. I mean, they're sitting with their laptops, and they can chat GPT anything that I ask them, even for the class discussion live, because I'm not banning the laptops because we need them in some cases. And so, like, what are we doing in the classroom? And I think there's a lot of conversations going on about this, but and we're in the eye of the cyclone right now. So I don't think we have the answers for what it's going to look like on the other side. But for what it looks like during the storm right now, I think that my answers are really revolving around two things. One is, we have to understand that everyone's becoming a creator, of like, it's very like the easy part is coming up with an answer or sifting through and answering the question. The hard part is, what do you do with that? Like, to what end? And so, it's, as somebody said to me, we have to move from a classroom or a learning environment or teaching environment where it's like, what do you know? To a learning environment of what can you do with what you know. And so I think that's the mental model. That's one piece. And then I think the second piece is for everyone who teaches. So I'm teaching design thinking and higher ed reform. Everyone who teaches we have to help students, we have to model for students, us as professors, right? Contextualizing the experience or the AI in whatever it is we're teaching. Like, to say, okay, if I'm teaching design thinking, we do a lot of research, user research. Okay, so how would you do user research, with the students? How would you use AI to expedite that process or pressure test what you think you're learning from, let's say, user testing? Um, so we have to model behavior which shows that we are using it for better productivity and better insights. So those are kind of just two things that we're looking at right now.
Well, just a few moments ago, you mentioned that you put your pencil down last year.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is, your book is describing a very fast changing world of career preparation. So, since you finished doing the research and writing, have there been some further developments that would affect
Yeah.
your view on how fast things are going to change, and how
Yeah.
are
It's
they going to change?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about this today, scrolling through my feed, of how fast, um, like, and I think the Trump administration is partly accelerating pieces of it, or at least accelerating people's, feeling like they've got to take action and movement. And we can talk about, a couple of these in turn. But the first one I'll mention, which I think is the biggest, is, what we just talked about, is the, let's call it the AI wake up call, where people are thinking, oh, this is not just me, having a new, a better Google search, right? This is going to affect every facet of life. And I'm doing some writing and speaking lately on what it's doing to the entry level job market. So I think and I mentioned this in the book, I talk about it, but I think it's accelerating. And what's accelerating is the fact that, let's say you're in college, and you're thinking about, you want to get a summer job, or you want to get your first career related job after college. And you start, putting resumes onto Indeed, like Patrick did, right? When he was finishing high school, right? But you start doing that. And now you have AI tools that can make your resume completely, like reflect what's in the on the job description, right? You can just, feed them both into the ChatGPT engine or whatever you use, and it will optimize it for the job, right? The problem is everyone else is also doing that. And so now not only are they getting so many more resumes, because a lot of, like AI bots apparently are, they're like, I've heard something like 2 to 3 out of 5 resumes that go in for a job aren't even a real person, or there's somebody trying different, they're using like 3 different versions. And so, you hear employers say, I'm getting 1,000 resumes. But the problem is they all look exactly the same, and you don't even know which ones are real. And so it's just choking the system. And so if we have a choked application system for learners or, graduates, and you're probably starting to see, like I am, there's been a lot of writing about how the job market for career, particularly knowledge worker, students coming out of college are underemployed. I mean, it's been a trend for a while, but people say it's exacerbated from 23, 24, 25, because companies in particular, not so much small businesses, but bigger companies are pulling back on the number of grunt workers they're hiring to do their knowledge, base knowledge research, even if they haven't yet figured out how to use AI to increase productivity. They're starting to hire against a future supposition that they don't need as many people to do the work at the lower levels, right? And so what it means is that the person coming out of college has to figure out, how do I get up to the next rung where, maybe I'm managing the bots rather than I'm being replaced by the bot. And so there's a lot of discussion about how internships are becoming more important, and apprenticeships, so that those are maybe because those are, if you have experience, you get pushed up the rungs of the career ladder a little bit. There's more hope for you, right? And this sounds really depressing, I think. But I do think, like I said, we're in the eye of the cyclone. I mean, I do think we're working now to figure out ways to, uh, clear the choked arteries of the job application pathways, and to help students stand out. I think I'm gonna teach about this this coming year at Mason, a design sprint around how do we help students stand out? What are the validation uh, uh, certifications that would help them stand out in an AI choked world?
Next question. David Phillips asks, it seems that higher ed has grown to an unnecessarily and unsustainably large size, and that efforts to make it necessary and sustain it are causing significant problems. Do you think that there's a way for the academy to deliberately shrink itself without massive layoffs and upheaval in the lives of current employees, or do you think that it could or will if it can't?
Well, that's a really thoughtful way to put the question. I think, I didn't get to the part about the Trump administration in the last question. I kind of stuck on AI, and I do think that the Trump administration is kind of forcing some of the things that where people in the academy like knew they needed to do at one level, but they're being pushed to do it in a way that is maybe much, less thoughtful, more reactive, and in ways that, aren't necessarily, in the ways of their choosing. And I'm not saying I'm supporting the kinds of cuts that are being forced, but the what you hear everybody say quietly is, yeah, we needed an efficiency movement, but not like this. So I think when I was a trustee on the board of a large, Virginia's largest public university, for 8 years. And so, we were looking at these budgets, and I was on the board from 2005 to 2013. So that was the time of when the growth was happening, right? And when we would ask, because we, a lot of people were business people, and they're like, well, like, why are things so expensive? and and we tried to hold tuition. I think we did, many years, but other years we couldn't, because the legislature was cutting funding. And I think so the bottom line for expense is really, the personnel costs, just like any company sees. I mean, healthcare costs and labor costs, as well as the real estate costs. We were a growing university all the time, and these sorts of costs are not, they're fixed costs, right? It's not like like we were a public university. We certainly weren't building the climbing wall or the lazy Susan River that you hear about, that we're making like beautiful dorms where everybody gets a single room. I mean, we were not doing that, and still the costs were going up. So I do think that higher ed gets a bad rap for, and they're not very good at explaining why the costs are going up. But we definitely, there's definitely ways to cut, but a lot of that cutting, I hate to say it, is being done around looking at the programs that are under enrolled. And guess which ones those are, right? They're the humanities and foreign languages and even some of the hard sciences. And that, in fact, about 6 or 7 states, and I think North Carolina, maybe one of them, have various forms of performance-based funding in place where you don't get paid for programs that are under enrolled, or you're challenged to close them down or shrink them if you don't have enough enrollment. So I think efforts to efforts to be more efficient are, the number one result of those efforts is going to be fewer humanities and social science courses offered. I hate to say it.
Well, I'd like to go back to another point that stuck in my mind from your book, namely that you interviewed some employers who are souring on college graduates, and the expression that one of them used was he's tired of their baggage.
Yep.
That he regrets having hired people who have the baggage of college and is now looking for people who don't have the baggage. Maybe you could elaborate upon that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and this wouldn't be for every graduate coming out. Obviously, I mean, this is a generalization. And this was a woman who was a recruiter, has been a recruiter for like 40 years, and has watched how it's changed over time. And I think the two things to mention here are college graduates are entitled for a reason, right? They've spent a lot of money on this degree and put a lot into their entire, K through 12 experience, and the pressure, and they feel rightly, in my mind, that they have arrived at a good job, right? And they think that the college should be delivering them to the door of their first good job, right? And when they get there, and either, like, 50% of college graduates today aren't able to land jobs that needed a college degree. And so they're not happy about it. And and it shows up in how they present, right? And then when the recruiter that had her quote was, "If I see one more communications major, I'm going to pull my hair out," because her point there was that people are coming with these non-specific majors that they don't actually have any specific skills that she can bring to the company. And the proliferation of comms majors and general business majors, and some others, where sociology is one of them that she mentioned. She said, I can't get them hired, and yet they've put all the work in, and no one's leveled with them about what else they need.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to a generic major. That was part of her point, but they have high expectations because they've put all the work in.
All right, next question from Zagros Maj Sajadi. Isn't part of the problem the black box aspect of the college transcript? No one actually knows what was taught in each class.
And that actually is a lot of colleges are working on that. I profile one college in the book. I have a chapter called "Can Colleges Adapt?" Where I profile 5 different colleges that are kind of working on this topic. And one of them is Western Governors University, which is a really unique college. They don't get a lot of press because they keep their head down, but they're actually the second largest single university in the country, and they were formed by five governors, five Western governors at the beginning of the digital age to do something that was unique at the time, which was online, college education. And so they have created something called the skills profile, which comes out with, they may still have the transcript, but every student has a skills profile, which is a translation of whatever the learning outcomes, like from your English course or your math course, translated to what that skill looks like as a job, as in job descriptions, and it makes that crosswalk. And there's actually a whole website they've created, and a group called the Open Skills Network that is tracking these skills. And I think it's online at like Open Skills Network. You can just Google it. They have like 140,000 what they call rich skill descriptors, which have been worked on through labor market data. And it's very helpful. I mean, I think a lot of colleges are using it now. So that's one example. The other is something called the LER movement, if some of you have heard about that, which is the Learner Employment Records. It's not sexy, but it's this idea, and the Registrar Association for the country is, ACRO is putting this together. This is where basically it tries to extend the transcript to everything you might be doing, and it kind of badgifies really the transcript. So yeah, if you look up, if you're interested in pursuing this, the viewer, look up learner employment records, and you're going to get tons of stuff that will give you a lot of interesting case studies.
Question now from Robert Moranto. I worry about EDDs and MBAs, EDDs and MBAs who care a lot about PR and not so much about learning, designing micro-credentials. Many of those leading the movement seem more like marketers than educators. Any thoughts?
If by educators, if you want us to kind of like stay with the terminology of learning outcomes, where where a syllabus is constructed around deep learning um, outcomes, and ways to verify that versus the trendy skill descriptors that would translate. I mean, I think that's fair in some fields. And I think MBAs, where a lot of this work is happening, and EDDs, which, if you mean, the sort of the working a version of like a PhD for educators, and it's for working educators. I have a number of friends who have gotten that degree. Yes, you could argue guilty as charged, but that's what those folks are looking for, I think, right? Those are professional degrees. Those people are not going to be academics, maybe, or maybe they are academics, but they're more like academic managers. And when I think of my friends who are doing the EDD program, so you might not like that as a response, but I mean, I wouldn't say it's marketing necessarily. It's translation would be I guess, my comeback.
Next question from Peter Goodmanson. Since prestige signaling is one benefit of a degree from a well-known university, is anyone working on competitive selection programs, for example, Rhodes-like scholarships, that may lead to an actual course of study? The selection itself would be the goal rather than as a filter to a program. Thoughts? Have you heard of
So,
such a thing?
sorry?
Have you heard of anything like that?
So like a Rhodes Scholar program where it's not after you graduate, it's like a way into a program as opposed to something you get to do as an add-on. I guess that's what the
I think so.
question means. Yeah. Well, I know so I went for graduate school, I went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and they just announced a program kind of like this. I think it's part of the, antidote to all the heat that Harvard is taking in part, but I mean, they've been talking about it for a while, where you're now, if you want to be a civil servant, They have a competitive program that you apply to get into the school in this civil servant. So it's for people who already are civil servants and people in the military to apply to get the Kennedy School degree. Whereas before, I can tell you from experience that the Kennedy School for Americans, for in the U.S. are either neither a government nor the school itself offered anything like that. Whereas a lot of foreign governments were funding people to come to the Kennedy School, and we were at the point where we had 57% of the students at the Kennedy School were international students, which is nice on one hand, but then, you would like to be having a premier program like that, training a lot of US civil servants as well. And so now Harvard has created that program itself, which I was really excited. This just happened like 2 weeks ago. So that's just one example, but I think I'm sure there are others.
Susan King asks, your emphasis is on the students and their needs to be employable. It's a moment when higher education is rethinking its mission. How radical a change is needed? Is the college experience you had passe? What's your vision of higher ed beyond ideas like micro credentialing?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it is important for us to kind of step back and say, okay, what's it gonna look like mid-century? And I have a chapter in the book called The Great College Reset that does that, or that tries to do that from at least the point of view that I'm seeing. And micro-credentialing is only a piece of it. It's kind of an enabler. I mean, I describe that I think by mid-century, most, if not all, except the elite colleges, will offer a kind of stepladder approach to college, which means that you would be able to come in and out of an institution or switch to different institutions depending on your needs to get a series of shorter term um, uh, sub-degree credentials that will increase your earnings power and allow you to pivot, allow you to grow. And they might be recommended by your employer. They might even be offered by your employer. But colleges will often be behind it, right? They would be, either white labeling or you could go back to your alma mater. Alma maters need to get better about marketing to their graduates, right? But if you imagine a shorter form of college, you can imagine people putting together, I mean, they call them stackable and portable is the term. That's very interesting. And one of the things that I think will supercharge this movement is something, again, in the big, beautiful bill that just happened in the last few weeks, which is finally the passage of what we call short-term Pell. And so, Pell Grants are, you're eligible for a Pell Grant for college that pays about $7,000 worth of your tuition and expenses if your family is low income, right? And so, but those Pell Grants you were never able to use them on non-credit classes, and most of these short-term pathways are not for credit. And we probably don't have time to go into why it's evolved that way. But what it means is that if you're going off to college, your parents drive you off in the family SUV and drop you off, and you're not sure what you want to be when you grow up, you are eligible for federal grants and loans. If you are a single mom and you want to get a short-term cybersecurity certificate and you can't go to college because you can't get childcare, um, you are on your own to pay for it, usually. And that's a huge disconnect. So that disconnect, at least theoretically, is getting addressed, this summer. And I think that will actually hasten the speed at which we move to a stepladder approach because whenever there's funding in a new innovation area, we saw this in charter schools, we saw it in vouchers, there's innovation, right? Innovation gets pushed. And so I think you'll see a lot of innovation in that area. The other point I'll make about what will look different in 10 or 15 years is that there'll be a kind of a merging of, I think, the education and training, like an edu training ecosystem where the lines will be a little bit blurred between, what's an apprenticeship, what's corporate training, what's a college course, because, technology is forcing that blurring, and the speed at which skills become obsolete are forcing that. So there's going to be somewhat of a blending. And I think online colleges, in-person colleges will all become suppliers, if you will, kind of like in an Amazon, sales, the Amazon marketplace, you have providers, right? I think a lot of colleges, it's already happening, will become providers. And some of the most successful colleges right now are white labeling a lot of this stuff. So I think those are some of the trend lines that you'll see.
A question from Elizabeth Carey. There's a growing perception in higher education. Scroll.
Actually, while you're looking for that, I realized for the last question, I didn't answer, it was very quickly, I can just say, you asked, will the, sort of wonderful college experience that many of us had where we did get driven off to, will that still exist in 20 years? Yes, it will still exist. I think it will just be accessed by a smaller market. And so elite colleges will, have the best chance of surviving. They, may not be so elite anymore as they expand their, who they accept, but that will still be available, for anyone who can afford it, if they want that as the adultification process for their progeny.
Next question. There's a growing perception in higher ed that senior leadership salaries have become bloated while faculty are getting laid off or receiving lower salary raises. How can there be more auditing of these bloated salaries and lack of accountability for senior leaders who keep their jobs despite declining enrollment?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the public universities have obviously more, open, have more transparency than the private colleges. Um, I was with a couple of college presidents at an event like this, and somebody asked that question, um, and the president's answer was, I report to a board. I mean, they offer me the salary if they, and my staff. I mean, we feel like we have transparency. I think there's not that we don't have the kind of transparency and like activist shareholder process that you see in corporate America, right? Where you have people, shareholders going after some of these issues. Um, it could be that, um, um, I mean, what you're seeing is colleges closing down. I mean, we're losing, a couple of colleges every week in the past few years. So, they are imploding from not being able to sustain their folks. But I don't really have an answer to the question of why not get rid of the vice president for something rather than the faculty members. I think that's going to be a different scenario in each case, but certainly shutting down low enrollment programs, I've seen it happen where they lose their dean, they lose their faculty. Yeah, that is happening.
I'd like to ask this. How has your book been received? And I'm especially interested in reactions, if any, from those people who are still in the, oh, college is a great investment camp. Send everybody to college.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's still definitely a small but mighty group that says, um, it should be, well, a college should be an entitlement, or it's elitist, of us to say, like, go if you can, like we should be expansive and try to have a college for all, set of policies. And that was the policy in the US starting in the 80s. I write about this in the book, a college for all. We became very um, conscious that we were, tracking people off to trade school or to non-college roles, and that became considered, some people were starting to call you, racist if you were telling some kids that they weren't college material, right? And so everyone became very sensitive to that starting around the 80s. And the Bill Bennett's report, A Nation at Risk in the 80s, was actually, that prompted us to say we need more people going to college. And so, that we did send more people to college, and that number kept going up until 2010 was the high point. And then it's really started to drop back off. And it's really started to drop back off because of seeing the outcomes that people weren't getting through. Also, people, the expense has gone up as well, and some people are just saying it's not, it's not worth it. So, I think we're at a point now where we're trying to balance these two ideas, that college should be possible for everyone, but it should also, multiple pathways should be available for everyone.
I think we have time for one final question. Mark Steckbeck asked, is it unrealistic to ask firms to incur the costs of training workers when these workers can easily move to higher paying jobs elsewhere after they reach a certain specific skill level? This is especially problematic given the lack of communication and critical thinking skills among high school graduates today. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was an employer, so when the Great Resignation happened, and we like 50 million people quit their job in 2021, I think it was, and then another 50 million people quit their jobs in 2022. I think that was sort of the final straw for a lot of employers who were seeing that because of like LinkedIn and the internet, and the way it was going, is that your best people were getting picked off by the competition. I mean, I certainly saw this myself. And so, then when the Great Resignation happened, and we thought people are, employees are so fickle. They're always, like leaving for greener pastures. There's definitely a move against training, and having these like lovely training programs that like a lot of the consulting firms used to have, the banks, I mean, obviously, doctors and nurses and teaching programs are still doing it, but that's because it's part of the licensure requirement, right? So I think it would take that to get people back to a day when they feel compelled to do training, because there's no loyalty in the populace, and it's not just a Gen Z issue.
Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. I see that we've come to the end of our hour. It was an interesting discussion. I encourage people to read your book. It's a
Well, thank you.
really, it's really an eye opener, and I think you'll find that it's loaded with information that you'll find to be really stimulating. So, on behalf of the Martin Center, we thank you very much, Kathleen, and we wish you continued success with your book. And if you write anything else, another book or papers or anything
Yeah,
else,
well, I have a
I want
Substack.
to know about it.
Yeah, I have a Substack column. If anyone's on Substack, you can find me there. It's actually, I
Okay,
actually call it Who Needs College Anymore. So I'm continuing to write on these issues.
very good. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming on a hot afternoon. Thanks.